what happens after the vote? All elected officials in New York State would be removed from office. Everybody up there represented, governor, senators, assemblymen, judges, state attorney general, and the controller would all be removed from office. It would be the responsibility, based on the text of the referendum, that responsibility to remove them would fall to the sheriff of the counties that they represent. They would be removed by the sheriff. We're not talking about anarchy here. We're talking about a devolving of New York State government to the county level, much like you would a very large, I use General Motors as an example. They have a board of directors that oversees multiple companies throughout the world, and we could fire the entire board of directors and it wouldn't affect or adversely affect any of the companies underneath. That's what we're doing. We're firing the boards of directors of the state of New York. And we'll devolve that government down to the county level, and the county executives of the 62 counties would be responsible for holding the state referendum, or the state constitutional convention. Only for a very short time. The state government would, well, we'll have questions after, okay? All administrative state offices will continue to function. Nothing is going to change from an administrative process. The checks and bills are all going to be paid and everything's going to go out. Nothing administratively would change. The only thing that would change is who's responsible. Instead of a bunch of corrupt criminal legislators and state government, we would devolve that power to our local level, to the county executives of the 62 counties, because they're closer to us than those people in Albany. Okay, next. 62 county executives, representatives must hold a state constitutional convention to establish a new government under a new constitution. A new election would be taken. The very first thing would be to elect delegates to the constitutional convention, which would take, the process would take time, and then once those delegates are elected, they would devise or revise a new constitution for the state of New York, which would set the rules for any subsequent election. Obviously, in the Constitutional Convention, if we were to win control of that Constitutional Convention, we would preclude any current elected official from ever holding public office in New York again. What if the referendum is not passed or is not taken? This is a monumental undertaking. It's trying to involve over 4.7 million people statewide. It's trying to get people at the polls in who knows how many election districts. I don't even know how many election districts there are in the state of New York. There are 960 towns. Each of them has multiple election districts. Erie County has over 1,000 election districts all by itself. So having people in every one of those election districts is a monumental task. So what's going to happen if this doesn't take place? Well, it's the second piece of the puzzle. As we're building our mechanism to have the referendum, we're also building simultaneously the ability to challenge incumbents in the primary election in the current election system. These people are not invulnerable. They have an Achilles heel. It's the primary election, because all Republicans are voting for Republicans. All Democrats are voting for Democrats. Those are, by the way, the only two choices you have. So if you're not a Republican or you're not a Democrat, you should become a Republican or a Democrat. As bad as that sounds, and as distasteful as that is, you need to, in order to take them on in the ballpark where they're playing, you got to be a member of their team. So we're going to take them out in the primary election. Let me give you some examples. Dale Volcker was in office for 31 years before he was challenged in a race. Do you know that? He had never been challenged. 31 years in public office, and he was never challenged. I challenged him, and I spent $25,000 in Erie County. He spent $1.2 million, and I beat him anyways. But there are 4 counties involved, and he made up the difference in the other 3 counties, and he's still in office today. 2 years later, we ran another candidate against him, and he lost in Erie County again, but he made it up in the other counties. Why? Because we don't have the resources to get all the way across the district. But as we're building for 2010, we're building the resources to challenge incumbents like Dale Volcker, like George Maziarz, like Stokowski, like Joe Bruno, who's not in office anymore, but let's use one of my favorites, Sheldon Silver. We're building the infrastructure to take them out of office where they're most vulnerable, the primary election. We have to get that number of participants in the primary election up from 3% to, God, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60%. We need to win, not in Erie County where we are right now against these legislators, by not 200 votes, but 20,000 votes. It's possible, and it's in your hands. You get to do it. And there are people who, early September is not too bad outside, And so there are picnics and things that you're going to and so on. Nothing is more important than voting in that primary election. Nothing. If they're spreading dirt on your casket on that day, at least have filled out an absentee ballot. There is nothing more important on primary day than voting. If you go to the poll and you recognize the guy that's running, vote for his opponent. The primary election, Phil, next. This is how the primary works. We the people have delegated our responsibility to nominate qualified candidates for public office to our local committee person, who you don't even know. And you don't know how he got elected. And you don't know that you can replace him, but we'll get there eventually. But if that committee person keeps nominating people for public office that you don't approve of, you have reserved the power to run a candidate in opposition of that candidate that they've nominated. You get to say, I have reserved my right to run for public office and to support any candidate that is not endorsed by the party for that same office. And when two people qualify for ballot access, then that produces a primary. That primary election is going to take place in September, like clockwork, whether you know about it or not, whether you know of a candidate coming or not, it's going to take place. Last year, not last year, but the year before last, I went to the polls to vote in the primary. I didn't know that there was going to be a primary, and I pay attention. But I'm going, and if they tell me there are no primaries, then I'll just walk away. There was a primary, and I didn't even know about it. I recognized the name of the seated judge, and I said, I don't want him. I voted for the other guy. I didn't know him from Adam. But I didn't want the one that was in there. I want change. Real change. Not this junk you can believe in. And that process is repeated for every one of these offices. We just saw a presidential election that lasted 2 years, by the way.
Yeah.
And the primary took place over a period of nearly 18 months. But we get to choose who's going to represent us in the general election. Next one. The third thing, we're going to take over the nominating process of our parties. I, for one, am sick and tired of some guy sitting in some office in Buffalo telling the people in Akron or Alden or Marilla or Wales who they're going to endorse. I'm tired of guys like Ralph Moore using the power of the Board of Elections to bring criminal charges against candidates that want to run. I'm tired of, and this actually happened, I'm tired of the Erie County Sheriff walking into a bank demanding the bank records of an individual running for public office because he's not the endorsed candidate, and finding if there's anything in there he can prosecute him for. That's happening in Erie County. That's happening all across New York State. These people are exempt from the law, and they'll use that exemption to destroy your life. Where's Joe? Joe's one of our volunteers. He's floating around here somewhere. Just recently, a guy put one of our signs in his restaurant. Proudly displayed, abolish New York government. 3 days later, the New York State Department of Taxation walked into his restaurant, filmed every person in his restaurant, took the receipts out of his cash register, all without a warrant, all without cause, all because of that sign. People who put that sign up are going to be targeted by the government of New York. People who run against the endorsed incumbent are going to have their lives turned inside out by someone that you're paying for. When I ran for public office the first time, they tried to audit my business out of business 7 times in 1 year. I'm still here and kicking, and I'm not going away until we win.